name's Ciaran. I'm going to be your host for this episode, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jamie Harford, CEO of Inverse Funding. Jamie is behind several businesses, not just Inverse Funding, and he started his first healthy fast food business back in 2012, which was right next to a Greggs. Since then, Jamie has worked in the automotive industry and has been working full-time in fundraising since 2018. Jamie managed 20% of all crowdfunding raises funded in Europe in 2020 and has worked on over 100 successful pre-seeded raises. He's now CEO of Inverse Funding, and Inverse have developed an amazing resource for high-growth businesses. They've supported over 60 companies since 21, helping them produce high-quality documents, implement strategies, finance system, and data analytics to ensure that they are fit for funding. Jamie, you're really, really welcome. How are you doing today?
Awesome. I'm awesome. I'm super happy to be here. I'm excited to get down and talk, and I'm just really, my ambition always is education and knowledge transfer. So I'm hope we've got two good minds here, and whoever listening can take some value.
Awesome. So many different avenues to go down, Jamie, but I suppose what I would love to do is start at the very beginning. So I mentioned there in the introduction, you first had your first foray into your own business in 2012. And I'm just curious to see kind of how you were kind of 2011 coming into 2012, what were you doing and why did you decide I want to do something myself, and what were those things that were going through your head to get you in that position?
Great question. I mean, ultimately, business for me has always been a way to provide a life. I know there's a movement now of, ideation and, rapid startup, fail fast. But for me, the system and the mentality was always very different. So I very simply wanted to achieve a certain life. And I knew that very, very young. Sort of 2021, I had exactly a roadmap in my own mind of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And the first step to all of that was doing it myself and starting and being accountable for my own future. So that was what sort of led up to it. A lot of frustration. I left school early, went to work in my dad's restaurant, and just realized that's not a life that's going to serve you forever. It was cool when I was super young because my friends at school weren't earning any money, and I had a couple £100 a week from just working tables. But yeah, when I started getting to 18, 19, 20, I realized I'm gonna have to look a little bit higher than this. And that's no disrespect to the family business. We had 2 restaurants, so we certainly weren't Jeff Bezos and co. But I learned a hell of a lot about operating, and I learned a hell of a lot about how to manage teams, which ultimately is all a business is. It's how big is a team you're capable of running. And yeah, that's what drove me to do it. So I just, I took the huge step of doing it and getting out and doing it. But the primary focus for me was always, I wanted to go on holiday to Morocco. I wanted to eat in the nice restaurants. I wanted to be a big business figure.
So kind of getting into that then, obviously, as you're saying, the motivations are, I want to kind of have a lifestyle that allows me to do certain things. So was one of the driving things like certain kind of models that you were building to test out different business ideas before going down the route, just to check, does this give me the margin I need to achieve my goals? And how are you working through that?
Yeah. So if the focus is on income and lifestyle, the way that you approach that's very differently. You want something that's easy to set up, has a very low barrier to entry, and has a huge upside. So one of the first businesses I did was when this was 2007, and I can show you a newspaper clipping at the time to prove it. And I did student recruitment, and the reason I did student recruitment was I could go around the local student halls, which is what I do with a flyer saying, hey, if you want a job, email me. Jobsforstudents.biz, what a great email it was. And I would then go to all of the local bars and the local rugby club and say, hey, do you need glass collectors or anyone? And I did that because I could take 50p an hour off the people working. It was just a really simple revenue model, zero barrier to entry. And that's what I was looking for. The next one I did was in students again, because I'm from Newcastle. We've just got so many of them. I went to the local estate agent, and it's it's not an estate agent. It was owned by a company called Addison, a guy called Ian Baggett, who was just like a local entrepreneur and genius, to be honest. And I was like, I'll rent your student flats out for you. And he was like, how? And I was like, I'll just bring the students, and I'd just again go knocking on the doors, get them to sign up, take them down, and take my commission for renting the room. So, my business focus has always been how quickly can we get to revenue, so
Yep.
we can have a nice life and everyone can get paid, versus the capital expenditure to get there.
Mm.
So, even our current business that we're working in now, Inverse Funding, which has had incredible success, apart from salary sacrifices, it didn't cost us a penny. I still work on that mentality of just, get in easy, and revenue is the primary focus.
Yeah. And I suppose once you're kind of getting into those operational scenarios, whether it's renting students out or getting students into the bars, at what point in time do you analyze to say, I want to scale this up? Or it's gotten to a point where I've achieved what I've got to achieve here and it's giving me the value that I wanted? Like, how do you come to those decisions?
Classic entrepreneur. Classic entrepreneurs are always unsatisfied, still lying in bed on night time unsatisfied. That's just a fact. So the problem with the student businesses in particular was, well, I'm limited by geography and I can only walk so far around the halls, and it's actually hard work. It sounds like a lot of fun,
Mm.
but you're doing 6-7 hours a day just walking around halls, dodging security guards, knocking on doors, saying, "Do you need somewhere to live next year?" It's just not scalable. And as I said, I've always seen where I wanted to get to, and that's been the hardest part, is building a scalable business. So it's that classic entrepreneurial itch that just keeps me moving. Okay. Yeah, so that's how it is. It's more to kind of get beyond this.
Yeah, yeah. And in those businesses where you had to uh, scale or bring in other talent or put some capital expenditure, how did you identify if they were the right people or it was the right gamble to reinvest or put cash back in?
Tricky one, tricky one. It's a bit easier with food because it's directly linked to output. So the more people
Hmm.
we could have in on a lunchtime, the more meals we could serve. So it's quite binary in that sense. I found that very easy. When you're going outside of that and you're talking about services businesses in particular, you just get frozen. You just get frozen in that scenario because there isn't really a right answer. You've
Hmm.
now got sort of a diminishing rate of return. Anybody who I bring in is going to be half as talented as I am, and they're going to be twice the price. That's it. Margin's gone. So scaling issues early on, absolutely, they're just impossible.
Hmm.
And I think ultimately the right answer is, the only times you can really scale safely is when you can really measure that ROI. It's just a case of, all right, I'm going to put £100 behind this. What's that return going to be? I've got better as I've got older and understand. But in the early days, it was completely crazy. It was just winging it.
And just digging into the food business for a second, we've had a few people on the podcast that come from different food and beverage backgrounds, and one thing they always kind of struggled with was getting that first unit or first premises. How did you find it in your healthy food business? Was it a challenge, and if so, how did you kind of overcome it?
Yep, great question. I had an unfair advantage. I think that's one thing that I do now. I work with founders. I look for their unfair advantage. That
Mm.
doesn't mean a privilege, it's an advantage. So my unfair advantage was that at the age of 16, my dad didn't want to run the two restaurants anymore. He was done running our two restaurants. He'd
Yeah,
done it for nearly 30 years. So at 16 years old, I was doing rent reviews and I was doing leases. So when I was 21, ready to start my own, I walked into that meeting.
yeah.
I didn't pay a penny. I got a rent-free period, and they contributed a little bit to my fit. So, I think with anything, it's just how you deal with those situations. So I had an unfair advantage in that case.
I suppose that's really, really interesting point because obviously unfair advantages can be the making or breaking of a startup when
Yeah.
it's such a small chance that you will succeed. How much obviously you're able to analyze that now and look at from an inverse funding perspective of the types of businesses that you're looking at. But did that impact any of the business decisions or businesses you went into post the healthy food restaurant chain? Did you then always think, what's my unfair advantage before getting into it?
No, no, this is something that I've come back to now. I've got this knowledge base and understood.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's dissecting what's happened in the past and going, well, why did that actually happen? Because if you believe nothing happens by chance, it felt like chance at the time. I was like, wow,
Yes.
that was a great deal, but it wasn't a great deal because of chance. It was a great deal because I knew what to say. I knew the piano song to play in front of that particular person. So
Mm-hmm.
now at the time, I had no idea. I was like, wow, this is all manifestation, and I'm so lucky. But no, when I look back
Yeah.
on it critically now, everything I've ever done, I've realized I can see very clearly why the outcome was one way or another.
Yeah. And then I suppose curious as well to get your thoughts, kind of looking back on past businesses and current businesses, on the people side of things. Like, how do you think critically about hiring and attributes for hiring, and do
Yeah,
you think differently given your experience?
yeah. So I've got two polar opposites to that. So in my food businesses, it was all about output. It was output focused. As I told you, it's just
Yeah.
who can clean dishes the fastest, who can
Mm-hmm.
box me more burgers per hour, and I was judging people on that propensity. A little bit
Yeah.
of how could they smile and wink to the customers, and the overall vibe of the place had the right energy, but it was mainly output focused.
Yeah.
Now fast forward a little bit to the business we've not spoken about, which is the VC funded car business, which what
Yeah.
started all of this off. So I went out of food, and I felt, okay, I'm a good operator. So let's keep operating. I'm good at operating, and I built the UK's largest warehouse. Again, got a rent free period. The landlord kitted it out for me, so it was all good. Got the biggest warehouse in the UK for aftermarket car styling, and there's
Mm-hmm.
articles again online I can prove that statement. I was built car designer to the stars,
Yeah.
and I got VC funding for that business, and that business collapsed after the VC funding, which explains why I do the job that I do now. Because I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
how many people can I stop that happening to? I put that collapse mainly down to two things.
Yeah.
One, the deal. I just did a bad deal. I didn't know a
Okay.
good. I didn't know a good deal then. I'd never done a VC deal before. My family
Yeah.
had never taken fundraising.
Mm.
I had a few people who were advising at the time, but ultimately now I know they were getting paid off the VC as a scout, so they were going to say the deal was good regardless.
Yes.
So I put that one down to hiring though. So the VC part of the condition was that I brought into the business this sort of like time served specialist, and they were going to cost me about 70K, and they'd come from workshop background in big car companies. Um, and now when I look back, I'm thinking, wow, I put my whole eggs in this one basket of just hiring this right person to run the
Yeah.
warehouse and the workshop and make sure that we were slicked. And ultimately now when I look back on that, I just think, wow, that was just not the right way to handle that situation at all.
Yeah.
Really, I should have because all it was myself, my cousin, who was my best mate, and he come from the restaurant background as well, so he's just really good at running the kitchen, which turned out
Yeah.
into you're actually really good at running a tool shop because it's just
Yeah.
tracking your tools and making sure that the stuff's there on time. So
Yeah.
we had a really good little operation going, but bringing someone else into that at that time shouldn't have been the focus. The focus
Mm.
was growth. It was growth funding. It wasn't manage the operation funding and make sure that we're eking out our performance in every area. So I do
Yeah.
attribute a lot of my failure to hiring
Yeah.
and getting that right. I'm blessed now with Inverse that we can hire a core team who are very talent specific. So I need a
Mm-hmm.
graphic designer. We hire a graphic designer and we judge
Mm-hmm.
that person again, like my food days, based on their propensity to deliver the output that we need. So I think there is a bit in that where you start getting into senior hires that it gets really complex.
Mm-hmm. And just that's really, really interesting. And I suppose digging down into that kind of where it didn't go so well, obviously very specifically focusing on that hire that was very on optimizing things, as you say, you wanted to go focus on growth and take it to the next level. But were there other aspects of the deal that you look back in hindsight in terms of the terms or how they went about it that you felt wasn't the best and you've learned from and you can help businesses with now going forward?
Yeah, so yeah, this is what started it all because I then had a
Yeah,
post mortem of this, and since I've done 4 years, this was 2018. I've done now 4 years of fundraising, 100 as you said at the beginning. So it did this absolutely spiraled all of this, and the deal. It was just the deal. It was just so bad that I've actually never seen it since. It was a fundraising deal
yeah,
tranched in with two tranches, so it was tranched. The second tranche was performance based. All of the deal costs came out of the first tranche, so the whole lot, including the second. So I lost like 30% of my funding amount coming in. It had debt repayment structure in there. This is off a big VC, by the way. This is off
yeah,
like a top 10 VC. It had a debt repayment structure in there. It had monitoring and observation fees. So basically, by the time I'd paid for all of that, and then I'd then hired this warehouse guy that was recommended, and I had to sort of have him signed in a contract before they transfer the money. So that was a balance. That was a juggling
yeah,
act.
yeah,
And in the interim, it was taking so long. It took 9 months. So we've got these people who were being told to hire, and we're having to sort of finance it, and we're just getting ourselves in this just mess, just
yeah,
waiting for
yeah,
the deal to drop. And on the day that the deal drops, all founders have that same feeling. I had a client of ours recently just dropped 200K, and they'd bought the champagne to open that night, and the 200K came in. The invoice followed from the VC for 27K. They put the champagne away. It's
yeah,
it's a it's a bit of a, if you've been through it, you know that feeling.
yeah,
So yeah, I felt that feeling on day one, and I was like,
yeah,
I'm up against it here. So yeah, I really do think the terms I could have been better advised, and that's why I'm
yeah.
here. That's my whole purpose. And my whole purpose is just knowledge transfer.
Yeah, and I suppose then kind of 2018 and a bit what we touched on in the introduction is obviously you then had a huge amount of success in helping people in crowd raising during that period. And when you kind of look at commonalities across people that do well on crowd funding platforms, is they can often be in the B2C space, so you can involve a larger community, but you tend to be a pretty strong marketeer in terms of how you talk to an audience, how you brand, and how you convince. Like, what were some of the things that you learned, and obviously some of the skills and knowledge transfer that you were giving to getting such success on crowdfunding platforms during that period?
Yeah, great question. And I still love crowdfunding. I've just moved away from it because crowdfunding's got harder, and not
Yeah,
not not raising money from your own community, but just dealing with the platforms.
yeah,
Um, they'll admit this themselves. This isn't a news
hmm,
flash to anybody who works with it. It's just become difficult.
yeah,
They're losing so much money. Um, well, they were losing so much money before the acquisitions that the model was
yeah,
cocked. So I think I was kind of in crowdfunding in the golden times, just before it sort
yes,
of got a bit sticky in the crowd and what you could do back then is turn up without any lead committed capital. So in 2018, 19,
Ah,
20,
that's really
yeah,
really important. I think just
yeah,
to even clarify for anyone listening, like it's nearly impossible to go into crowdfunding platforms today without say 35% capital. I would say is probably the
correct.
minimum that you would need. So that's a game changing moment where you're
Yeah,
going on really from
yeah, from
a zero.
zero.
Yeah,
Yeah. So back then, and to be fair to seeders individually, I still have this deal with seeders, because
yeah,
they respect me and Invis Funding, where they'll say if there is someone who comes and they've got zero, but you really think you can do it, we'll let you do it. So
that's
I
great.
can't, yeah, I can still do that. I have to put my neck on the line a little bit, and they get a bit upset, but we can do it. But ultimately, what that allowed us to do was start at the very beginning of a fundraising
Yes,
round and actually
yes,
go, okay, what is the plan here? What's the target? And that's where I kind of learned more about the overall holistic cycle of a fundraising round. I'm then seeing multiple rounds. I'm then seeing the same business transition and transform. So I've just got a beautiful oversight. But what makes crowdfunding specifically relevant is exactly what you said. I see fundraising as a communication challenge.
hmm,
I've got to communicate effectively to you why I want something from you, whether it's time or money. And you've got to understand it. And what crowdfunding forces you to do through no objection is on Crowdcube, you get 1,400 characters, including spaces and punctuation, to define the
Mm-hmm.
idea. C does is slightly longer, but Crowdcube is 1,400 characters. People generally can't write in 1,400 characters. They just waffle and waffle. So what I
It's ten,
learned,
like 10
yeah,
original tweets, basically.
yeah, it's 10 tweets to summarize your whole business idea. So
Yeah.
that's what I really love about crowdfunding. I think that's something that if you can get good at, which is being able to really summarize your business, make it exciting, punchy, opportunistic, that's how you get good at crowdfunding. So that's kind of what we've now taken forward into our methodology, where we kind of do crowdfunding without the platform, basically, and just manage it as a resource for a company. We carry that
Mm-hmm.
same ethos over. Let's condense it down, make it simple, make it so. And the other thing with crowdfunding is, don't forget, the investors are retail investors, which just means everyday folk,
Yep.
like the population. So you have to kind of explain things simply. You can't just use jargon, and you can't just rely on assumptions that you may have. If I
Mm.
said to you, Ciaran, I'm going to pitch you a fashion marketplace instantly, because you've got so much knowledge, you kind of could already imagine the revenue lines. You could probably imagine the business itself, just
Yes.
through your knowledge. However, when we're pitching crowdfunding, we have to assume that you know nothing. So we have to work
Yes.
out within that 1,400 characters how much is education, how much is excitement, and so forth. So it's a great process. I love it.
Yeah, actually, I'm just kind of reflecting. Like, it's an unbelievable challenge because it's so different to pitching to a VC where you're just like, I've got like a 30-second window for them to pick out maybe 1 or 2 points in this pitch deck that has 15 pages for them to go, yes, I'll maybe send an
Yeah.
email back. Or whereas, as you're saying, if I'm pitching to a retail investor, I really need to like talk through some really key points so that the messages land, and it's the education piece, and
Yeah, well, if we're
uh,
if we're looking at Swoop, for example, if we're building a fundraising campaign for Swoop, in an angel investor environment or a VC funding environment, the fundraising round that we're going to build is more about efficiencies, more about
mm,
transactional data metrics. However, for the crowd, we'd have to talk about the funding gap. We'd have to talk about the inequalities and how technology can balance it. So, although I'm sure you had those narratives in the decks that you've used to raise, crowdfunding
yeah.
would have to be super heavy on that sort of
Mm.
emotive narrative. So it would be definitely a different story.
And then curiously, I'm quite keen to kind of pick your brain on, obviously, as you kind of alluded to, you're moving away from necessarily focusing on kind of crowdfunding campaigns through crowdfunding platforms, whether they might be Seedrs, Crowdcube, because you alluded to one of the big pain points or barriers is I need to bring a substantial amount of capital to the table. Are there other trends that you've kind of seen over the last couple of years that have also turned you away from solely focusing on that area and looking at other elements?
I think that what crowdfunding used to be was an end-to-end service where you could sort of take someone through a process, and it was very formulated, very easy. If we do these actions, we'll get these outputs. What's kind of unfolded is that it's not as simple as that anymore. So you can't
Mm,
sort of guarantee a formula. So for us to be effective as professionals, we need to be able to guarantee a
yeah,
formula that works every time, and that's
yeah,
obviously something similar to what you're going after. So the other sort of macro trend that moved us away from crowdfunding in particular was just the maturity of the businesses that are coming on there now. We're now seeing sort of Series C, Series D raises on crowdfunding platforms,
yeah,
which for me has just killed the whole vibe. So that is kind of like a buzzkill. I just don't like it. I Inverse could make 5 times more money. We could have 5 times more amount raised if we did the bigger deals, but ultimately that's not helping the startups. So no, I didn't like that move. And I thought, okay, well, let's try and put the power back in the entrepreneur's hands. Let's try and build them the tools where they can do this. There was a time period where crowdfunding was a real, you know, it was a great fundraising option. You could go and get a
yeah,
lot of cash, but as you quite rightly pointed out, it's like 50% to get through through the engagement letter with
Mm-hmm.
them now, and then it's sort of 70% to launch publicly.
Yeah.
And ultimately, anybody looking at that from the outside is just like, unless you're really going for that marketing value and community value, it's tricky. It's a tricky one to sell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think they've done it to themselves intentionally.
Yeah, but I suppose as you alluded to, like I mean, their commercial model was pretty fact on how it was done originally. They needed to find ways to make it more
Well, I
sustainable.
I think the biggest rival to the crowdfunding platforms isn't another crowdfunding platform. It's Seed Legals. Seed Legals have slowly blurred the line between
Mm,
crowdfunding and reality, and they're going to
yeah.
keep going. They're going to keep going. They've now got their pitch pages. They've even got an article online that says that you don't need any FCA approval to share this pitch page. So they're sort of promoting people that they've obviously got all of the filings in place. The only thing that's necessarily missing is that nominee, which you can plug in from Valbound or Odin. So I see community raises changing anyway away from the
Hmm. Hmm.
crowdfunding model.
Yeah. Um, One area I'm really keen to kind of pick your brains on, and it's kind of really the genesis for a lot of businesses that you'll come across, which is, are you right for funding? Particularly, are you right for equity based funding? And it can be a challenging conversation to have with businesses because sometimes entrepreneurs are very passionate, or people who have ideas tend to be very passionate. But how do you have those kind of conversations where you're analyzing and having a conversation whether they are or are not a good fit, and explaining that back?
Yeah, I mean, massive. It's a massive thing, and it's something that you have to have a lot of responsibility over. Ultimately, when you're in a
Mm.
position where I've got the trust, I've got the reputation, it's not very difficult for us to sell our services because they're good, and we've got a spreadsheet of people that have had success and will vouch for us, and so yeah, I often joke that our website should be isitanygood.com because that's kind of the core essence. People sit in front of us and they just throw the information at you and they're like, what do you think? The ego in me, which gets better over time as I mature and see more things and more people. When I was young, 21, it was a nightmare. Of course, it was my ego, but I've learned that. But now the ego in me would always have said in the past, you can fundraise for anything. It's all just about getting it right, and any entrepreneur's equal value. All ideas are equal value. However, I've been proved to be wrong on that multiple times, and we had a situation recently where we started work with someone, took their money off them to build a pitch deck. It was actually an introduction from Swoop, and we ended up having to refund the
Yeah.
client. I just couldn't build it. I just couldn't
Yeah.
build it. I just couldn't. There's a line where it's like, I can make you a pretty brochure, but it's not going to
Yeah.
get you investment. And where do you draw that? Where do you draw that line is really
Mm.
difficult. And
Mm.
often you don't actually know until you get into the weeds, because as you said, entrepreneurs are very convincing.
Yeah.
And if they see that problem solution fit, you can be sitting there as someone and you're like, all right, okay, I can see that too. But in this case, it just fell apart, the go-to-market strategy.
Yeah.
There was nothing there that showed, okay, you're gonna, all businesses, or you've got this and you need to sell this. That whole middle bit was just missing. So um, we learn from everything, and now I'm always attacking that. Now when people are sort of, when I'm saying I can do someone's work for them, I'm just making sure that every point of the process we've got those answers. But yeah, it's practically impossible on
Yeah.
a first call to spot, because all that comes through is the enthusiasm, the excitement. It does take a little bit to get into the weeds and realize, but yeah, all you can do is be honest. All you can do is be honest.
One thing I suppose that has been good from, say, the original ideology around crowdfunding, and also as investing as a retailer, whether it's through SCIS or EIS in the UK, it has kind of probably opened things up to make it more of a democracy, to get people to see the opportunity. But have you noticed that trend, to see that businesses are coming from not the usual? So everything's not coming out of London or in
Yeah.
certain sectors. Have you seen kind of positive trends in that area?
Yes. However, the crowdfunding selection criteria does negative bias on these type of individuals. So whilst there are more definitely creative type businesses on there, so they're not just clinical fintechs, etc. The platforms, the way that they select businesses to go there, it does create that bias. So I think ultimately, even on crowdfunding campaigns, they've still got a heavy bias towards London. They've still got a heavy bias towards male founders. Their investors are heavily male. Platform investors are heavily male. I think we've had one campaign in history that's had more female than male investors.
No way.
I think so. I think
Can
so.
you remember what the campaign was?
I think I'm going to say Mama Made or or Flexa
Yeah.
Careers, maybe one of those two, because they're both awesome businesses. But one of them had that, and that was the first time ever because they promoted that pretty heavily.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately anywhere where you have resource as a barrier and resource as a propensity to raise funding as a network, you're obviously going to see a system in place that privileges one type of person over another. And I still see it now. We're doing fundraising outreach at the moment for a client. They're from Eastern Europe, and as soon as we swap the name over to their co-founder who is English, we get more replies. So there was someone recently said that I saw on LinkedIn that said they swapped from a female co-founder outreach to the male one, and the male one got 84% more responses. So
That's crazy.
fundraising's incredibly biased. However, that being said, to balance it out a little bit, we've done some amazing raises for ethnic minority backgrounds, for women, for LGBTQ, everything on crowdfunding platforms. So once you can get past those first initial barriers, absolutely, it's a great place and it's a great incubator because the communities are great. That's the other thing with crowdfunding, that I've kind of got this bitter taste in my mouth. So I do love the crowdfunding community. I love the investors on there. They're ruthless.
Oh my God, like the comments on some of that.
Unbelievable.
Jesus.
It's unbelievable.
Prepare for some intense due diligence coming at you. Like it's
unbelievable.
Reddit boards times 90.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's literally unbelievable. But I love that. And it's, I come again, I do link everything I do to the past, and I can see it. Sometimes stuff unfolds in front of me, and I'll never forget working in restaurants, and anyone who's worked in retail knows this feeling of just someone standing, shouting in your face, just being horrible, just shouting, oh, want money back or whatever. And you're just like, it's a plate of food, chill. So when I'm doing crowdfunding and I'm prepping them, prepping our clients, and I'm saying, right, look, it's going to get spicy on here. Let's just instantly take it down. Let's, service with a smile. I just link it all back to my food days. So, getting the 1-star TripAdvisor review and having to calm the whole team down and be like, no, come on, let's just send a nice reply. So I do see huge parallels between the two.
Yeah. One area I was kind of curious to dig into as well is you kind of touched on there, like where the customer wasn't my fit, because as you went through the scenarios of analyzing the business, you were like really struggling with the go-to-market strategy element of it. But are there areas that you find time and time again you guys really add value in terms of building that narrative for businesses raising? Is there like common areas, whether it's like talking through the target marketing or the go-to-market strategy, that time and time again, if you can get that right, it really helps with that kind of pitch into investors?
Yeah, ultimately for us, my biggest weakness and the bit that let me down my whole business career was numbers. It was just numbers. I didn't get a maths GCSE, so I was like disadvantaged in that sense. I failed it 3 times. I even sat it in the same room as my brother, and I copied my brother, and he passed and I failed. That's a true story. So I just literally, we sat in an empty hall and did a maths GCSE together because he'd failed the year before and he's that bad at maths. So I always missed this financial element. So when I ended up partnering in Inverse with my co-founder Ivan, who's just a mathematical genius, just understands finance, understands that. That really for us was the core focus of our product. Everything here has to be grounded in mathematics, and not just we understand it, that you, the founder, understand it. So it always is uncomfortable the first time you ask someone to pull out the finance model. It's because they're shy and they're nervous and they know it's no
Yeah.
good. But then we look into what's really important, and it boils down to a couple of key things, which is metric tracking. Um,
Yeah.
Anybody who's evaluating an investment criteria, and I'm sure the technology that you're spending your incredible funding round on is building technology that's just trying to
Yeah.
benchmark people against each other in a fair
Yeah.
way. So ultimately, that's the manual process any investor's going through. They're just trying to benchmark you against something else they may know and decide, is this good or not? And we think the best way to do that's with maths. So we focus on the LTV to CAC ratio.
Nice.
Classic, is it over 2.5? If so,
Yeah.
great, you've got a sustainable business according
Yeah. Yeah.
to people who want to invest. So yeah, we want to focus on that stuff. The narrative's easy. Again, as I told you, I find it easy to take a business and look at, the
Mm-hmm.
problem solution fit, but ultimately the investment's won or lost in the metrics,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
owning those metrics. And so yeah, that's what we try and focus on.
And then I suppose kind of final question for me, since your time in inverse funding, you're already alluding to adapting in a changing market in terms of you initially were dealing with the platforms, you're changing now, you can see legals becoming a different form of community. What are you seeing in the next 12 to 24 months that you're going to be adapting to how people are raising funding or the type of customers you're expecting to see over the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And ultimately, we're kind of in the middle of like this elastic band moment, where we've gone full remote and fundraising went fully digital to now snapping
Mm.
back to this weird hybrid, where some people want to meet in person and some people don't. Some people are happy behind Zoom. Some people are itching to get out. So our biggest challenge at the moment is still balancing that digital versus real life. So one of my clients, Rima, she's got a company called Tessel. She basically um, went to a PwC Raise event. She then came back. We coached her. We wrote a little article together on the event and took a
Mm.
picture. I then tagged a couple of people in the post underneath it from PwC in that ecosystem. She ended up getting an angel offer off the back of that. So then a year ago, that would have been the strategy.
Yeah.
So, we've got to find a way, and our biggest challenge now is finding that way to have that personal touch without damaging what is so great about the pandemic, which is
Yeah.
that now I can apply to any VC, any angel investor anywhere in the world and have a Zoom call with them that same day. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to lose that because that's been very powerful for businesses. And yeah, so that's our biggest challenge, I think, is just that balancing this digital landscape as we either come out of it or I don't know where it's going yet. And I find it hard to predict.
Nice. Well, I think it's fair to say, having listened to you for the last while, that you've got such a good mindset on reflecting and an apathy to adapt and change, which I think is an awesome mentality. But yeah, just want to say absolutely huge thanks from our side. That was just a pleasure just chatting to you there for the last 40 minutes or so. So really, really appreciate you coming on and chatting, Jamie. And I'm sure there's a huge amount any startup or entrepreneur will get out of that conversation. So thank you very much again.
Nah, thanks to you. I appreciate any type of platform to say what I want to say. So yeah, thanks for that.